Okay, so I guess this is a little bit of a shout out video to Head Exchange channel, which posted a video about 2 days ago on, it was by Douglas Harding, and it was from a 1991 talk that he had given in Melbourne. And one of the expressions that Harding uses in that talk that I wanted to maybe elaborate on further was this notion that you're not a product of the world, you're the origin of it. This distinction between being a product of the world and the origin of the world. This is a key distinction. Now, I think one way to help maybe to contrast those two with another expression that gets used by Alan Watts, where Alan Watts says, "You didn't come into the world, you've come out of it." And I want to show how those two different expressions and those two sets of distinctions are actually consonant and resonating with one another. Now, let's start with Watts. When Watts says, "You didn't come into the world, you've come out of it," I think he's directly combating something like Christian dogma, which sort of has the human placed literally on the planet as if by a divinity and as a kind of alien presence. It has, I guess, some of its tracings back to forms of Gnosticism, but the notion here is that humans will eventually go back home to a place that's other than this world right here. And so this I guess this notion here then of being sort of the world, that is, you've come out of it rather than been put onto it. And when we say that, you're literally of the world, I think the point here is that the very substance of your being is from the world to such a degree that you're as indigenous to the world as the world is to itself. You're a place and moment of it, not a thing on something else called the world. There's not like there's one thing called you and then this other thing called the world and then somehow you're related, but there's an ongoing worlding total event that includes you as a place and moment of that whole. Now, the way that that relates to Harding, when Harding says, and I just love that expression, that you're not a product of the world, you're the origin of it, he's helping to differentiate this notion of consciousness as the real you and the body, which is a kind of it's a manifestation that can be seen in mirrors and in reflections and in ways of apprehending one's body through consciousness. One's body can seem to be who I really am. So I could end up, when I look here at, right now I'm looking at the camera, and I could end up thinking that I am that person who I see, in the same way that when I look at the mirror, I can come to fool myself into thinking that the real me is this discovered object in the world that consciousness can apprehend, rather than trying to understand that consciousness itself is the origin of the world. It throws the world out from itself. Um, I've done a lot of work in the past, and I've tried to promote some of those ideas in some other videos, and I've done a lot of writing on this notion of dreamless sleep. It appears in my book, Selfhood and Authenticity, but and it's a very, I guess, a common concept in some Indian philosophies and some Eastern philosophies. But this notion of dreamless sleep, of who are we when we dreamless sleep? What does it mean that every day, every person every person, they give up on all worldly cares and they just recess back into a vegetative state where there really is no world. There is a grand inclusive, and you can't even say what it is. There's some sort of recession of all, and only upon awaking. And when one wakes up, there is an awakening of, I guess, first consciousness awakes to the world, and then from the world I trace back to this self that I mostly fool myself into taking myself to be. Most of us we walk around and we identify with the ego, we identify with the material manifestation of the body, and it's real. I don't think we want to deny this notion of Alan Watts, right? I think Alan Watts's point that we are of the world, we literally have come out of it, we didn't come into it. We're not something that's separate from it, placed on it. We're it itself, having emerged out from itself, and in a kind of haunting itself as another, we experience the distance from the world even though we're indigenous to it. That still can fit um, with Harding. I mean, I think Harding's point is that to say that you are the origin of the world rather than a product of the world, it's to realize that that product is very real, and there is a truth to the objective character of the things in the world that we discover, but there's something much more important to discover, and it's who one really is, who you really are, that you who can be surprised by the worldly self, that you who can be surprised by the things that go on in the world, the you who is the looker but can never be the looked at. It's that sort of scene, you sort of have that image of a keyhole where you walk up to the keyhole and you put your eye next to the keyhole, and as soon as you can see through the keyhole, what you see on the keyhole is the other side of the keyhole and the eye looking in. I mean, there's some kind of recognition of the origin of consciousness being distributed throughout all of the organisms, but it's just that humans have developed the capacities to delude themselves into, at length, identifying with the ego and the materiality from which they're right now spatially, temporally located, and giving a kind of a very real perspective on the world. But it's a temporary one, and I think we can see the temporary one the more that we admit and openly admit that we're more dependent upon the larger whole all around us than this notion of I'm here on the planet. See, I think this notion of I'm here, I'm a product of the world and I'm here on the planet, if you take those two together, we can see this notion, I think lots of people have it, that they're going to become something like a Star Trek character who leaves this planet. We're going to create little oxygen bubbles and little food bubbles that we're going to take with us as we go along. I'm very skeptical of that. If it's not apparent, I'm very skeptical. I think that we're more dependent upon the atmospheric pressure than we realize. We're more dependent upon the nutrients and the atmospheric commerce that we just take for granted. All of the ways that we need others' touch, all of the ways that we need the sun and the gravitational experience that is here on this planet. I think the more that people could openly admit that they are, in fact, a dreamless sleeper who occasionally, momentarily achieves awakeness, and that awakeness is the periodic, momentary achievement of an earth that can't have itself except by losing itself to haunt itself as another, and that consciousness is the origin of a world in which us as beings can, in awakeness, come to identify ourselves with our ego, can come to identify ourselves with that product that did come out of the world, but unfortunately to such a degree that we think that we're some separate things. We don't seem to realize that death is as natural as breathing, as is sleeping. And in your deepest you, in the you who is the real you, you need not worry death. You need not worry about death. You're already more than you could ever imagine. You are an ancient, ancient mystery. Okay, thank you.